This is the final word. It is story time. Story time 202 to be precise. Geoff Lemon and Adam Collins back in the verdant fields of cricketing history. The show's brought to you by Westfield, Westfield London, Westfield Stratford City for another couple of days. The last few passionate days of our summer romance coming to an end as London turns towards wintry weather. And the cricketing summer starts in the south.
That's right, Geoff, because this will go out on Saturday, tomorrow. You'll be at Bristol on Sunday, which will still be a Westfield spot on the show. But I guess this is the last of the longer episodes where we've been attached at the hip to Westfield since the start of the England season. This is the end of the England season, and the time for retrospectives and I suppose the time for thank yous as well. And they've been a tremendous partner, as we said on the weekly show a couple of days ago.
Attached at both hips because we've got one on either side. We've got Westfield London and Westfield Stratford City in the east and in the west. So it's kind of, I'm thinking of it more like if we're walking into a venue, you know, say it's a 1930s nightclub where we're running a nefarious business, and we're flanked by our security detail. We're flanked by our muscle, our supporters, the reason we can get these things done. And that's Westfield London on one side and Westfield Stratford City on the other. Little did I know, when I left Australia, naive as I was a young man, not knowing the ways of the world. I thought that Westfield was only the shopping centre that was near enough to where I grew up in the northeastern hills of Melbourne. I thought that Westfield was just the place in Doncaster where you went to maybe get a juice, you know, maybe hang around on the concourse next to some ferns, potentially once a year go and buy a couple of items of clothing to take you into the new school year. That's it. That. I didn't know that Westfield was a worldwide concern, and I didn't know that the role that it played, the heart and the soul and the pumping blood of a city like London.
I didn't realise that Shoppo was a Westfield. That's news to me. I quite enjoy in Melbourne how we've got like nicknames for shopping centres as well. Yeah, High Point, Knife
Point. Yeah.
Dandenong Plaza, it's Plaza, man. Off the Plaza. And the aforementioned Shoppo, which is, I've got a Westfield bag here too. It's not much. It's just a tote bag with Westfield down the bottom, but it reflects the fact that Westfield will remain part of my life and the Final Word community, and hopefully they'll be back with us again at some stage next year if all goes to plan, and they can jump on board for 2025. And why wouldn't they? 2025 is going to be a massive England summer as well, with the well, not least the England men hosting the Indian men, which is going to be a blockbuster series, and so much more. And that's been the story of Westfield as well. Westfield London, Westfield Stratford City. More extra, less ordinary. They're extraordinary support. Most appreciated.
We've had a few problems with story time the last few weeks with various other things going on that we've been talking about on the weekly show, but we're going to do our best to keep up as best we can. Adam, how are you feeling?
Good. Story time 202. We've had a good run recently for cap numbers as it relates to the show, which are kind of dusty old bastard territory. And that definitely applies for Pat Crawford, who made his debut at Lord's, which is where you're off to later today to timestamp the episode. You're off to, in theory, commentate on the One Day International. In reality, I've seldom seen London wetter than it's been in the last few days. At this time of year, we've just gotten incredibly unlucky. So I doubt there'll be cricket. But Pat Crawford, on his test debut, bowled 29 balls, then broke down. He played 4 matches in 1956. So I'd like to learn more about Pat, who's from Dubbo, but we can do that on another episode of the show. But yeah, 202. We have not galloped through the early 200s. We've reached 200 and we've come to a rather abrupt halt. But we will arrest this situation now the book's done, and now that you'll be leaving the country, and we'll have different types of commitments, but we should be able to get a few of these done in a row, or maybe in a job lot or something like that, so that there's lots of story time action throughout the course of October and November. Then we'll be together through November, December, January, and it'll be a lot more straightforward logistically. So that's the showing our workings bit. The only other thing I wanted to say in the intro before we crack on is that the wonderful newsletter from the Scorers and Historians Association, they send that every day. I didn't know this was a thing until recently, but they send an email on the day from 100 years ago what was happening. Well, at least that's been of late the form. And And it was 100 years last week on the 19th of September when Alec Bannerman passed away. He's described as the stonewalling Australian opening batsman and younger brother of Charles Bannerman, who scored, of course, the century in the first Test match in 1877. He died at the age of 70. Alec played 20 Test matches for Australia from 1878 through to 1893. He toured England 6 times in that space, which reflects as how often they were going over there. And yes, his Test batting average of 23 is something that you've remarked upon before, Geoff. I think he's the least productive opener to ever score 1,000 runs or something like that.
Lowest averaging. He's been known on the show at times as the shit Bannerman because it's telling that even in the introductory opening sentence to his own short biography, the first mention is who his brother is and what his brother did. His brother did something good, as opposed to Alec, who did a lot of, scoring 9 off 80 balls and then getting out, which I suppose was the job of openers at the time. Maybe we don't appreciate it in retrospect, but I still kind of enjoy hanging shit on him in retrospect because he doesn't mind. He's not here anymore. He's not being offended from beyond the grave. And maybe generations of Bannermans passing down could be. Oh, I've got something for you actually, Adam. I was contacted during the week by a gentleman, and we were talking about Frank Ryan, the often drunk finger spinner who played for Glamorgan in the 1920s. The great grandson of Frank Ryan got in touch and said, heard you talking about the old man on the show. Let me know if you want to have a chat, if you need any more information about Frank Ryan. And I will take him up on that. I do want to know more about Frank Ryan. So it is a nice reminder that these are not imaginary, they're not fictional characters that we're talking about. They are real people with real descendants at times.
Yeah, well, he was a real all-rounder in the traditional, I guess, 20th century use of the term, in that he was a multi-sport international for Wales. He played more football games than anything else, didn't he? He never played Test cricket, but as far as what his main sport was. But
yeah, he represented Wales in cricket, certainly, even though he wasn't Welsh.
And there was a third sport, I feel like, as well. Did he
Maybe that was Wilf Wooler that you're thinking of. You might be combining your Welsh internationals.
Oh, right. Maybe so. But still, I do remember the story of Mr. Ryan. So glad that we've been able to tie that together. We also had a descendant of the Bannerman family get in touch a couple of months ago, which I don't think made the show. I wish I remembered who it was now, because it might have come up on social media. Anyway, not to worry. We'll do that on another day. Before we get into the main bit of the show today, a reminder about our live shows. They're going to be across the country when we get to the Border-Gavaskar Trophy Series in, well, it's not long now at all, really. The 21st of November is our first live show. That's at the Rosemont Hotel in Perth. Then we go to Melbourne on the 29th of November, as we said on the weekly. That's our big one. So if you can be there, please be there. Bring your people. Likewise to Adelaide at the Rhino Room, hoping for a big guest there. Brisbane at the Bright Side on the 12th of December. So Adelaide is the 5th. Brisbane is a week later on the 12th. And then we round it out in Sydney, the same venue as this year, at the Comedy Store on the 7th of January, which is night 5 of the Test match. So all the ticket links are in our show notes on that Linktree page. Very easy to get through to. Book now. Get yourself sorted out. Bring your mates. Make it a Christmas party. Bring your cricket club and join us on our first proper comprehensive national tour, which will be at the end of the year.
Bring your cricket club and your cricket bat. It's curious that you can have both of those things. They may not let you in with a cricket bat. I don't know, but they probably will.
Yeah.
We've been at our shows with cricket bats before. All right, let's get on with what we need to do, which is play the game of Nerd Pledge. Nerd Pledge is the game that we play with nice people on the internet who fund this program. They send in a donation, a contribution, a recurring donation in a configuration of numbers that relates to cricket in some way. We have to figure out what it is. Owen, I believe this is Owen T, our Scottish Owen, has sent through £2.86. 286 is the number. Interpretable in any way we wish.
Interpretable via this clue. Number should be 2.86. Okay, that's pretty clear from the currency, I hope. For a clue, I've made the classic decision of going back to the first game I ever attended as a pledge. You're right, Owen. That is a fairly common theme over the years. And going back, there are some things on that scorecard that are very funny from a 2023 viewing. All right, into this. Geoff, the first game that Owen went to, when was it? Where was it? Tell us more.
First game Owen went to. Look, I looked through a few things. A game in Aberdeen in 2009, which it wasn't a bit earlier, as said Owen when I said 2009. Just give me a sense on your temperature on that. So we ended up back at 1999, the first World Cup under the ICC, and a World Cup that you know only too well, Adam, having made a audio documentary series about it. So probably better that I got this answer than you, because I got to learn things and you would have already known them all. Now, you've got two groups of six in that World Cup. You've got the main sort of 8 teams, the historically biggest 8 teams. You've got Zimbabwe kind of in the middle of their good period, their best period at the top level. You've got Bangladesh, who are not a test nation yet, but will become one based on this World Cup, on Pakistan having 4 runouts and losing a game. No comment. And you've got Kenya and Scotland as the fringe countries getting a gig. I'm assuming, you can probably verify this for me, that Scotland got their gig as being a host team. Was that why, or was there a qualification process?
There was a qualification process. The 1998 ICC trophy, which Bangladesh won under Aminul Islam, which is seen as like this moment in time, because if they don't win that, they don't make 99. And if they don't make 99, they don't get the chance to beat Pakistan. And then the campaign that ran very quickly that made them a full member. We interviewed Aminul, Bulbul as he's known, on the 99 podcast, which is in this feed. We released it as part of the retrospective that we did, I think, this time last year.
During the World Cup.
It was during the World Cup, that's right, yeah. So you can hear more about Bangladesh's story. So they certainly qualified through that tournament. Scotland did get through as a co-host, and Kenya qualified as well. So Zimbabwe were a full member by this point. They were made a full member in 1992. So it was the 9 full members, the co-host in Scotland, and the 2 qualifiers, I'm pretty sure. That's right. Then it was it was a similar model to what we had in 1996 in terms of the number of countries that got a start. The difference in 99 was this was where we started getting more creative with the format. In 96, it was a very long group stage, which boiled down to quarterfinals, which is something I completely detest and continue to. And when the World Cup expands to 14 teams in 2027, I'm very pleased to hear there won't be quarterfinals. The problem there being there's not enough competitive tension when you only reduce the pool to 8. When you reduce the pool to 6, the games have a lot more riding on them a lot earlier, and you can still have that middle step that I'm sure you're about to tell us about, Geoff, in the mighty Super 6.
Yes, so 12 goes to 6. Half of each group goes through, so each team gets to play 5 times up front. The Scots do not have a strong team at this point in time. I mean, they've been included in some county cricket here and there and played some touring teams and that sort of thing, but they don't have a particularly strong side.
Well, they do have Gavin Hamilton.
They do have Gavin Hamilton.
So it's kind of one of those ones where, like, can you build a team around one player? I mean, Scotland did. And I'm being reductive there. Of course, there would have been other capable cricketers in the Scottish 11, but there was so much emphasis on Hamilton. I remember when Australia played Scotland, it was all about this guy who, could be a world beater and made 60 odd, and of course, and went on to play one Test match for England. I'm pretty sure when he did as a lot of associate players do, and saw an opportunity to play for a full member, which is totally reasonable. Of course, had a long career with Yorkshire, but there was a lot of Hamilton chat coming into this, and I tried desperately to get him on 99. And he gave me the Blue Bombers. I had the 2 blue ticks from him about 3 times on WhatsApp. Never got back to me. So let's say he's on the greatest season that was shit list.
Gavin Hamilton, aka the Ghost. So okay. Well, they did not win that game against Australia. They also lost to Pakistan, then Bangladesh, then West Indies. They weren't playing in Scotland much. They played a game in Worcester, a game in Durham, a game in Leicester. Bangladesh was their only Edinburgh game up until their last match, which was against New Zealand, which I believe is Owen's game. Now, they don't beat New Zealand. No spoilers here. This is not an upset story. This is not the miracle on ice.
Far from it. I mean, I don't want to get ahead. Are you going to talk about this? Are you going to talk about net run rate?
Yes, I am going to talk about net run rate.
Okay, fair enough. Yes, okay. Just to make sure you knew the context of the game.
Yes, I did work out the context of the game. What stands out from the scorecard, as per Owen's direction, one is that Scotland get bowled out in the 43rd over, so they bat most of their overs. The second is that they make 121, which is a run rate of 2.86 runs per over. That's our number, 2.86. 6.
Love it.
Um, Geoff Allett for New Zealand, who you did speak to for the documentary series, who was the equal leading wicket taker, along with Shane Warne, who took 20 wickets. He bowls 10 overs, 3 for 15. 3 for 15 off 10.
It's the Dukes. It's the white no day-night games. Placed out at 10:30 of the morning. And it was the White Dukes, the only time a White Dukes has been used in a global tournament. And it suited a bowler like Allett. It suited all the swing bowlers, really. I mean, you might remember Glenn McGrath was bowling, at least initially in the tournament, at first change because they were worried about, not worried, but they were accounting for the prodigious movement the White Dukes was getting, which is why they set up slightly differently early on and let McGrath. I think Alan Donald bowled first change as well. So it did change the gameplay for some of the more traditional bowlers. But Allett, who was a left-arm hooper, he made the absolute most of those conditions. And often it was New Zealand bowling in the morning.
The thin White Dukes, if you will. Bring them back. Have a tournament with the White Dukes.
I'd love
see
that.
what happens.
It'd be so good.
Dion Nash also enjoyed the White Dukes. 10 overs, 1 for 16. And I could say that Scotland lost 3 quick ones. That would not be true. They lost 3 wickets without scoring any runs, but it took them a long time to do that. So Mike Smith, not that Mike Smith, out for 1 in the 4th over. The first drop, George Salmond out for 1 in the 7th over.
George Salmond, we've got the Tabs on here. George Salmond ran the marathon for the Tabs last year, and he's very proud up there. And played cricket for Scotland. But he's a great taverner, and I think he was formerly part of I think he still is part of our WhatsApp chat for the final word runners, because he was, by dint of being a taverner's runner at the Edinburgh Marathon, got looped into the final word crew. So that's nice to see him named here.
Well, yeah, getting out for 1 in the 7th over, maybe less so. And probably less so still for Michael Allingham, who was the other opener, who made 2 off 25 balls and was not out until the 11th over. So, I mean, they didn't call the first period a power play at that point, but there was still something in terms of fielding restrictions. In those first 10 overs, 3 for 12 off the first 10, which is something indicative of the time. Gavin Hamilton, aforementioned, and Ian Stanger patch it up for a while. They both make scores in the 20s. They take a long time to do so. Strike rates of about 40 for those two. But they put on a partnership of 54, and then a couple more ducks follow. Alec Davies, the keeper, makes 24 slowly. Again, the standout of the day is Asim Butt at number 10, who hits a 6. The crowd goes wild. He ends up with 10 from 10 balls, strike rate of 100. Everybody else is going at a strike rate of about 40 throughout the day. So the only shot that goes over the rope is that one. They hit 6 fours during the entire innings, and as they're winding through the tail, Chris Zinzan Harris, 3.1 overs, 4 for 7. 4 for 7. Very, very, very 90s stuff. So we've got the opening bowlers who go for 1 and a bit and over. Harris goes at 2 and over. Chris Cairns, Nathan Astill, 3 and over. My favourite part of this story, though, Adam, is a guy called Carl Bulfin, who I don't know if you spent any time looking into during your documentary.
So, no.
But even our New Zealand, most dedicated New Zealand correspondent, Alex Brown, had never heard of him. Carl Bulfin's a quick bowler. He's from Blenheim. He's from wine country, up at the north end of the South Island. Played for Central Districts in 96, moved to Wellington later. He stood out at the time because he had long blonde dreadlocks and he was quick, sort of New Zealand standards. We've done a few of these stories about New Zealand late 90s bowlers who come in, they're rapid, they're erratic, and they have very brief careers and they don't last long. So he's another one of these. But interestingly, more than international cricket, he gets a degree of profile through Cricket Max, which also gets called Supermax, which is also prison, so it can get confusing. But Martin Crowe's brainchild, where you've got 2 innings of 10 overs each, but the batting order resets, so you can bat twice. It's a T20 test match, I suppose. Ahead of his time. Free hit after the no ball, that was a Martin Crowe innovation that's now been brought into the main game. Things that haven't been brought in are wides being worth 2 runs and having 4 stumps rather than 3. And it used to be 3 in a row. If you hit 3 4s or 3 6s in a row, the third one was worth double. So you go 6 6 12 or 4 4 8, which I liked that. And then they had the max zone, which was the area dead straight. So for the straight drive, but probably wouldn't account for, I think it was both ends. So if you scooped, nobody scooped then, but if you could utilize the scoop now, you could use the max zone if there was one behind the keeper. I'm not clear if it changed ends with the bowler or if it stayed at both ends. But you got double runs for balls hit through the max zone.
So this was in fashion around that time. So there was Super 8s as well, which was the other variation of this. I'm not sure if Super 8s came before Super Max, but I mean even now the six-a-side tournament that I played at Wormsley earlier this season had the double zone, which was quite cool. I hit a 4 through one of them at one point where you get given an 8 for it and all the rest. There was like 6 slalom gates that you had to hit them through at different points around the ground. That was a pretty interesting way of doing it. But the hitting dead straight thing, the reason that sits in my memory, not to be self-referential, but how can you not remember this? When we made the state final, my school, Lindale Secondary College, we got through like the 2 tournaments that preceded it. I'm not sure exactly how rigorous it was, but we made the finals day at the MCG. And I remember hitting a straight 6 into the old pavilion. Admittedly, you're not playing on the main square, you're playing on the grass because that's how Super 8s worked. It was an Incrediball with 8 fielders. And you still wore pads in a box, but you didn't wear a lid, I don't think. And I got one through the gates and thus into the pavilion before it was knocked down in 2003. This would have been about 1999 or something like that. So you don't forget hitting a straight 6 on the G with all the caveats in mind. And that was because of the incentive of hitting straight because you got double runs. So, this was where people were clearly wanting something different, wanting something more. And we know we get to the end point of T20. Well, not really. The singularity might be, God knows where we'll get to with T10 at the moment and whether there's a form of cricket that'll be even shorter than that. But without taking the piss, there'll never be like Super 3s or, hear that sort of nonsense on some of the Facebook forums. But but still, 2020 is what people were searching around for. And I reckon Martin Crowe played a big role in getting people's minds adjusted to that through innovations like this.
Yeah, I didn't realise how closely it bleeds into T20 at the end. So there's a news clip I found about the first Supermax game, which was a sort of mixed team. Dean Jones went and played. Lance Cairns was playing sort of a bunch of New Zealanders, few Australians, whatnot, as an exhibition game. Martin Crowe was there. The clip has Jeremy Coney presenting it on the news as well. So it starts with Coney leading into. I'm not sure what he would have made of it at the time as an innovative thinker himself, but I didn't realise. Maybe this is just a blind spot for me. I didn't realise they actually played full internationals in cricket max. So there are a bunch of internationals with New Zealand teams playing visiting sides who agree to play this format. And that goes on as recently as 2002. They play India. Sachin Tendulkar makes 72 off 27 balls. Sachin Tendulkar has a cricket max record, which doesn't pop up on any of his profiles. So that's a year before T20 emerges formally in England in 2003. They're playing cricket max in 2002 with India and New Zealand. Anyway, we're talking about Carl Bulfin, who he plays 3 of these internationals against England in 1997 and gets on the radar that way. And then eventually he gets picked for 3 ODIs in 99 against South Africa, and he gets picked in the World Cup squad where he only plays this game against Scotland, doesn't get another run. So on a frugal day when everyone else is going at 1 and over, he bowls 6 overs and goes for 31. So he still goes for 5.5 and over against Scotland, who are crawling, which gives you an indication of the fact that he used to go around a bit. He gets 1 more cricket max game for against the West Indies in 99 and takes 3 wickets in an over, including Brian Lara, but never cracks it at the top level, has injuries. David Sewell was a New Zealand quick we spoke about a few months ago who became a sparky. Carl Bulfin became a house painter, and he's the one expensive bowler when Scotland make 121 at the 99 World Cup. So they don't start well, New Zealand. Matthew Hart makes a duck, Nathan Astle out for 11. They're 2 for 19, but they steady on from there because Roger Toos takes them on. Craig McMillan plays second fiddle. They put on 61. Naka and Stephen Fleming get out in quick succession, but then Chris Cairns comes out and boshes 20 not out. Toos makes 54. They run it down in 17.5 overs. So Scotland go at 2.86. New Zealand go at close to 7. And that means they close up the net run rate gap where Australia tried to screw them by batting really slowly against West Indies and taking 41 overs to chase 111. New Zealand are playing after that game, so they make up the net run rate gap. And for 8 of the Scotland players, that's their last ODI. Hamilton, Stanger and John Blaine, who takes the 3 wickets to fall, are the only 3 who go on to play another ODI for Scotland, given that so few games had status at the time. And for New Zealand, it is the last ODI for Carl Bulfin, the dreadlocked maestro who, by the World Cup, had shaved his head. He wanted to be taken seriously, I suppose. So he got rid of the locks and went for the nude nut, but it didn't help his World Cup campaign. But he did play a World Cup game, which is more than most of us. So that's my 286, because Owen was there that day watching Roger Toos smacking the ball around and presumably imagining that Roger Toos was a greater stature of player than in fact he possibly turned out to be on the international stage.
Yeah, well, this is what New Zealand had to do, just to bolster the point you made before. Australia didn't just chase that slowly against the Windies, the last group game. So they rolled the Windies for fuck all.
111.
111. That's the McGrath to Brian Lara ball, which is one of the best first balls you could ever possibly dream to get.
110. They bowl them out for 110 and have to chase 111.
And what happens is they get to a position where they can't lose. Steve Waugh's batting with Michael Bevan, and they take 13 overs to make their last 19 runs. So they go as slowly as possible in order to give themselves the best chance of bringing the Windies through with them and eliminating New Zealand, because the assessment, crudely, from Steve Waugh, and I think it's a reasonable thing that he did. I don't think he got absolutely smashed in the media at the time for it. But the idea being that New Zealand were more of a threat if they faced them again than the Windies would be. So, New Zealand obviously responded well the next day, literally the next day. It was the next morning when they walked out and smashed Scotland and made sure they'd go through, and ultimately made it to the semi-finals where they were eliminated by Pakistan. Doing what we do for a living, we travel a lot, which means we are frequently logging in to our NordVPN accounts. They're so easy to use. You can connect with one click or auto-connect for zero-click protection. 6,000 servers in 61 countries. So essentially it means you can change your virtual location so easily at top pace. I know when I was following the Olympic Games recently when I was on holiday, I never really had to worry about things dropping out or having to watch it in a different language. I was able to plug and play all the way through the course of that fortnight. It's mostly sport for me, but it might be different things for you. It also means that you can shop in the location where you want to be. Geoff gave great detail on that on the weekly show recently. And here's the good thing. We've got a deal going at the moment on the final word. So nordvpn.com/TFW. That's no risk, the 30-day money-back guarantee. You support the podcast as well. If you're going to get a VPN, get it through us, nordvpn.com/TFW. Of course, that link is in the show notes. You can find the best plan, get your discount, and make sure that you're able to watch what you want to watch around the world when you want to watch it. nordvpn.com/TFW.
Very good. We've got a number for you.
I'm going to back myself. I'm going to back myself in 9 minutes. To tell you the story for Ollie Chauhan, who's sent through 477 AUD. Now, it's an AUD. I stress that point because there's no clue attached to it. You've got to, you go one of two ways with this, right? I speak to Ollie and get a sense of what it might be, or I do my own thing and decide whether I think it's bang on. Well, we've done the latter this time. It's not going to be, Tom Hogan's bowling average of 47.7, and it's nobody's batting average for Australia.
There has been an answer on Tom Hogan's bowling average before, I'm pretty sure.
Right, but I thought it would be a batting average, 47.7. There's not a single Australian batting average which has ended at 47.7. I love it when a hunch comes to fruition. Now, I thought, what about the test match list? Test match 477? And no, that's no dice. That was England playing India at Old Trafford in 1959. A good test match with lots of milestones, but not remarkable as such. And, of course, the Australian currency, it's going to be an Australian answer. I thought, what about ODI 477? Bang. Direct hit. Ricky Ponting from backward point shit this is.
Oh.
One day of 477 is one of the most significant matches in the era that underpinned the success that followed. It's the 1987 World Cup final.
Another World Cup.
Yeah, another World Cup final. That's right, another World Cup. So, I realise that we've touched on the brushstrokes of this game in the past, but we've never really done the full story. I mean, if I said to you, Geoff, tell me about the 87 World Cup final, what do you know of it? I'm pretty sure I know the first thing you would reference is, you tell me. What happened in the 87 World Cup final?
Clearly, the first thing to reference is Mike getting reverse sweep.
Exactly.
When England are going well, gets out, they fall to pieces, and that's about it.
Yeah, and look, it's the Gatting reverse sweep, right? Yep. AB bowling to Gat, maybe Booney making runs and being player of the match, and I might give you Steve Waugh's fielding as a few of the things that people know about the 87 World Cup final. But let's do this properly. And the context is
and the Australians are shit. they've been shit for years, and
That's right.
This is the point where they actually do something.
Yeah, hadn't won a Test series for years, and this was the time when the one-day team and the Test team was essentially the same. So it meant something that they were able to enjoy some success. And the context is that last year when Australia won the 50 over World Cup, the men, I said it was their best win ever. The response I got was, 87 was pretty fucking good. That was very significant. And as I say, it was because of what was going on at the time. Rebel tours, Alan Border trying to hold the thing together with gaffer tape. Probably the lowest Australian cricket's been in modern memory. I know that there are some horrible things that happen at different junctures, and of course the sandpaper episode is one that people will point to since then. But this was bad. This was a really rough time that extended for years and years and years, and then this World Cup comes along, Bobby Simpson as coach, and the tide turns, and so it is. But I thought I'd set up the 87 World Cup first. 8 teams, just to give a bit of contrast to what you described then with 12 teams in 99. 8 teams here, just 27 matches. India and Pakistan co-hosting, which could never happen now. And it all happened in 1 month between the 8th of October and the 8th of November, 1987. It was the 7 Test nations.
Good. Why don't we go back to that?
Well, Champions Trophy could be this, But what I'm about to describe now is why the Champions Trophy could never be that. So that there were 7 automatic qualifiers, the Test nations, plus Zimbabwe, who got through the qualifying. And this was interesting to me as well. This was the 86 ICC Trophy. They beat the Dutch in the final. It was a 16-team competition played in England for 1 World Cup spot. Looks absolutely epic. Gibraltar were in there, who we've referenced a number of times this year. They knocked off Israel. It was Gibraltar's only win. The Argentinians are in the other group. So, there's a combination of teams who are on the cusp of playing with the big boys like Zim and Denmark, and countries that very much weren't, and they were absolute amateurs. So
easier to get past Gibraltar on the cricket field than on the sea.
Yes,
it seems to be the
that's
thing.
right. That's right. There has been some consternation down there since I was there, actually, in relation to how bullish the Spaniards have been around their claim on Gibraltar. So watch this space on that front. Anyway,
the Spaniards, meanwhile, have a piece of Morocco, which they claim is Spain. Like they've got the Gibraltar version. What's it called? Starts with C. It's just on the other side of their heads. So
right.
I mean, come on. Throwing stones here.
Is that the Canaries? No, no. That's separate.
That's an island chain. It's called a Ceuta, something like that. Ceuta. It's literally the same kind of deal. It's a little headland tip of land that helps control the water passage, and it's technically Spain. It's sort of legally considered to be Spain, but it's on the landmass of Africa. It's landmass wise part of Morocco.
Just the tip, Foster. We could talk to Ole Mortensen about this, by the way, the great Derbyshire Denmark quick, who I have been in correspondence with and is interested in doing the final word. So we've had requests for him before. We'll hopefully have the big guy on here next year when he's in the UK. He was here for something in the middle of summer, but we were both in America at the time, I'm fairly sure.
Yes.
Anyway, he took 20-plus wickets in that 1986 ICC Trophy when he was the best bowler in the non-Test playing world. Right, let's move to the tournament proper. Very much of its time with India and Pakistan co-hosting when they were, when relations were such that those two teams could play each other and do things like this. 21 grounds for 27 games. How's that? A bit like 99 in a way, where they really shared it around. Only Karachi with 3, then Lahore, Calcutta, the Wankhede, and Madras, as it was then known. Chennai had 2 games, and everything else had 1. There were 4 teams in each group, which you would think they play each other once. Nah, fuck it, let's play each other twice. This is why they couldn't use it in the Champions Trophy. So there was double round robin, which meant that you had quite clear disparity in the top of the group and the bottom of the group, and quite a few dead rubbers towards the end.
Right.
Australia beat India in the opening game thanks to a Geoff Marsh century. This was another one that I didn't realise. I thought Geoff Marsh made that 100 in the World Cup semi-final. He actually made it in the first game of the tournament, which proved quite important as it got Australia going. They beat India by 56 runs. They beat India in the final over, where Craig McDermott was defending at the end, and India beat them by 56 runs in the other game, but they went through with 5-1 records. Pakistan went through with a 5-1 record in the other group. England were the second team to qualify. But in fairness to England, they did beat the Windies twice. So, there's a sense that they really did earn their spot in the semi-final. The other thing I didn't know, it's been because I haven't studied this tournament properly before, clearly, was that we often, in a man-catting context, refer to Courtney Walsh not running out the Pakistani non-striker and that costing them a spot. That's true. But this wasn't the final day of the group stage as I thought it to be. I thought it was the last game, last gasp moment, and Courtney Walsh does this kind of...
I think it was West Indies' last gasp moment. Like, it was just a game that they had to win because they'd been poor and lost a couple, wasn't it?
Not quite. This was 17 days before the group stage ended. The Windies had multiple chances to retrieve the situation after this. So they did lose this game, but they ended up losing a couple more. So
it's post hoc.
It's post hoc.
Saying that this was the thing that knocked them out.
Yeah, so strictly speaking, yes, they would have gone through had they won that game. They would have gone through instead of England.
If they'd then hadn't lost lost subsequent games.
Exactly.
So then other results would have changed. Could have changed.
Correct. That's it. So to the business end, Australia play at the Gaddafi against Pakistan. That's a bit stiff, I reckon. You get drawn at the semi-final on the other side of the group against the hosts at their national stadium, not the national stadium, that's in Karachi, but still it's a significant day where Australia get over the line against Pakistan and reach the World Cup final. David Boone, 65 from 91. Got to love those old school numbers. They made 267 for 8. They accelerated towards the end. Mike Valletta, who's going to come up again in a moment, made 48 from 50. Steve Waugh, 32 not out from 28 balls. So they were the finishers, and they won that. They bowled out Pakistan with an over to spare and won by 18 runs. Craig McDermott, 5 for 44 in the World Cup semi. He was the heart and soul of the Australian attack through the 87 World Cup. He took wickets at the top and took wickets at the end here. And it was a very similar trajectory for England, who made 254 for 6 in their semi, with Gooch making a century, and they bowled out India for 219, with Eddie Hemmings taking a 4-for. So, yes, fair play for England going through the way they did. And they go in as hot favourites, Geoff. Make no mistake. England were expected to win this World Cup final. They'd done the Grand Slam in Australia the previous year in 86-87, where they won all 4 trophies they were competing for, including the Ashes, comfortably under the captaincy of Mike Gatting. So, when people speak about the upset of Australia winning it, that extends all the way through to the decider, according to the reports I was reading. Australia make 253 for 5. Valletta, again, that's the innings that people often reflect upon. 45 not out from 31 balls, the story we've told on the show before. But David Boone, just as it was in the semi-final, top scoring, was 75 up the top of the list, and contributions from Geoff Marsh, Dean Jones, Craig McDermott, the pinch hitter, the original pinch hitter in the World Cup final of 87, made 14. And it feels about par. Eddie Hemmings, a couple of wickets, and the usual suspects all chipping in. But England in their chase, they lose Tim Robinson first ball, the hero of 85. We've spoken about Tim Robinson, Geoff, in the past.
We have.
Then after Graham Gooch is out to Simon O'Donnell for 35, his leg before to Scoob, it's 66 for 2. And this is when this key partnership begins. Bill Athey, Yorkshire, then Gloucestershire, interesting career, goes all the way back to the 81 Ashes, I'm pretty sure. Maybe the centenary test of 1980s when Bill Athey emerges. Anyway, he's very much doing the job along with the captain, Mike Gatting. And look, every experience I've had with Mike Gatting's been a good one. So much so that I'm dead keen to get him on the final word during October. My working thesis is that he's the least understood cricketer in the world. Or should I say that the reputation that he has is so far misaligned with the sort of character that he is and the contribution that he's made. So I'm dead keen to really tell his story in depth. But I think that the way he gets out here contributes to it. So, as captain, they are making this run at the World Cup. They take it from 66 to 135 when he's out reverse sweeping for 41 from 45. That is the iconic moment of the match. And Bill Athey's the next player out. And this is where I mentioned the Steve Waugh fielding. Brilliant piece of work when they're returning for a third run. That's the second moment you hear quite a bit about, where Steve Waugh was this young tyro in the field and made it count with bat, ball, and out in the deep. Alan Lamb's bowled for 45, and it looks like it's done with 3 overs to go, 220 for 7. Then Phil de Freitas in over number 48 off McDermott goes 4, 6, 4, and it's on again. But in the 49th over, Steve Waugh locks it down, just 2 runs off it as a 22-year-old, a clutch over from the all-rounder. 17 from the last is required from Neil Foster and Gladstone Small, but they fall 7 runs short. Australia win, England lose. It becomes a theme. England lose again in 92. Australia, by contrast, that's the first of 5 World Cup victories, including 2023 on the men's side of the ledger. And it's the moment where the trajectory changes, the ascendancy. Australia are on one, England proceed to have a really tough time that starts really from there all the way through to the end of the 1990s. And if you want to go back to the origin of that, you could go to one day 477, the World Cup final of 1987 for Ollie Chauhan.
It works. It works. I'm going to say it's nothing but net. Ollie, that may not be your answer, but it is a good answer. Maybe you could just decide that it was in retrospect. I didn't know we were going to have a World Cup ODI slow scoring theme through the first bit of the show, but we have. Right, I've got Graeme Innes and I've got $18.90 AUD. That comes with a clue, Adam.
I've really enjoyed all the pods over the last few months. So I wanted to up the amount. Thank you, Graeme. The 0 means nothing. The number 189 and I in Nottingham to see this record melt. The number is, 189. And I was in Nottingham to see, he's not the number 189. A pretty easy pledge, I think, but I'm keen to hear you tell the story. 189, Graeme Innes. What was the record? Go on.
Okay. Well, so this is interesting. This is curious in a way because we've done a lot of stuff around this number without necessarily doing much on the number itself. Melting. Betty Snowball is the one doing the melting when Tammy Beaumont goes past her record of 189, highest score for an England women's player. We've had so much Betty Snowball adjacent material over the last few months. We had the story about Netta Reinberg, who managed the teams, one of the teams around that era when she played. We had Myrtle McLagan, who opened the batting with Betty Snowball. We had a story about Leary Constantine, who was Betty Snowball's coach when she was a teenager. We had the one about this very test match where you, Adam, focused mostly on Tammy Beaumont and her career. And we had another pledge from Jane, I think it was, in relation to Elise Perry's dismissal for 99, which was another thing that Betty Snowball did in Test cricket. And it also links with my Scottish theme from the first answer because Betty's dad, Dr. Snowball, what a name, was a Scot, and Betty Snowball was educated in Scotland. So I thought before I go on, I will request of Daniel Norcross that he sends me a short voice note about his feelings about Betty Snowball, of whom he is the number one devotee, president of the fan club where they're one. And if he sends me one back, I'll drop it in here.
Yeah, it's very on brand for Daniel to have romantic feelings about someone who played cricket 100 years ago. But yes, that's okay. That's in line with how you would expect Daniel's brain to work. So he'll be very happy to supply that for Storytime 203 or something like that.
Well, it may even be today. It may make it into this episode. Let's see.
Betty Snowball. Where do you begin? I mean, I'd say that it was one of the most bittersweet, glorious, but painful memories of my working life was to find myself at Trent Bridge in June as Tammy Beaumont was inexorably advancing on the magical number of 189. Why so magical? Because it was the highest score by an Englishwoman in a test match. I believe the highest score by an Englishwoman in all forms of international cricket. And it was performed by the great Betty Snowball, a woman of such magnificent hands. And look at the pictures of her hands. When you see them next to the stumps, they're so predatory but so soft, agile but brutal, presaging the downfall of a hapless woman who may have just snaked an inch or two out of her crease. 8 stumpings, I think, in her international career, or test match career, alongside her 13 catches. Also the braiding of the hair and the contrast between her and Myrtle McLagan, the two giants, the giant heroines, the founding mothers, if you will, of English women's cricket, who appeared in the first 7 test matches ever to have been played between England and Australia between 1934 and 1937, I think it is. You couldn't fail but fall in love with her. There she was, 5 foot, elfin, but the greatest glove woman in the land. Alongside her, Myrtle, this powerful kind of, proto-Talia McGrath style all-rounder. I became besotted. And also, she's called Betty Snowball, for fuck's sake. I mean, that is such a name. So I found myself on commentary towards the point when Tammy was moving through the sort of 160s and 170s, and then she slowed down, terribly slowed down, and I'd gone past my commentary rotation, and I sort of got up resignedly, and Henry Moran and Adam Mountford, a producer and co-commentator, told me to stay on, and I couldn't believe it. I was welling up inside as Tammy got closer and closer, and then for some reason she completely froze around 189. But I think, asking her afterwards, she wasn't aware that 189 was the big number, even though it had been, well, it was then and that. I kept on banging on about it, and then she finally got there. And of course, surpassing Betty, I suppose records are there to be broken. Betty will still be number one for me. But it was a great moment, and the crowd realised, because I think they've been listening in and word had filtered around. So when she went past 189, the crowd got really involved. It was beautiful. Of course, Tammy went on to get 200, 208, same as Ian Botham got at the Oval in 1982, and I saw that as well. And yeah, it was a beautiful moment. It was similar heights, I would say, Tammy Beaumont and Betty Snowball, but, despite all that, and despite Tammy's great achievements, there can be, for me, only one true greatest, and that is the mighty Betty, who I think we all miss. And she has been a screensaver on my phone. I alternate between her and Ken Dodd.
Betty Snowball, born in Lancashire, in Burnley, which I liked. Authentic, you're a real authentic British cricketer if you're born in Burnley. 1908. Dr. Snowball is a cricketer. He wants Betty to play, which is good. He's a progressive-minded individual. We're fans of Dr. Snowball. She goes back to Scotland for school at St Leonard's, which is near the golf course up at St Andrews. Cricket and golf, unfortunately, getting pulled together once again. Leary Constantine is the pro player at Nelson in the leagues at the time, which is why he ends up coaching her on school holidays. Once she finishes school, she ends up training as a teacher at the Bedfordshire College of Physical Education. So she's obviously very sporty. She plays squash and lacrosse representatively for Scotland, and she plays cricket for England, because why not? If you're a Scot, you can hop back and forth and do both. And she's very tiny. This is one thing I didn't realise about Betty Snowball before I started looking up this answer. She's 5 foot flat, that is a very small human being. If I meet someone who's 5 foot tall, they come up to about mid-stomach, and I could pick them up under one arm usually and carry them around.
Maybe you can help me with this. So this has come up a little bit since Winnie's gone to school. So I'm not sure whether this is accurate or not, but Winnie's convinced that she's the smallest person at the school. And look, Winnie is a little girl. Like, she's a small girl by 4.5-year-old standards. And I was trying to think of reference points from people who are short in stature but have achieved physical things. So I played her a compilation of Muggsy Bogues moments from the NBA in the 1990s. Mm-hmm. I told her about Prince. Told her about Michael J. Fox. Now I can tell her about Betty Snowball.
You can tell her about Betty Snowball. I mean, every jockey since about... they used to just let ordinary dudes ride the horses. That's kind of the funny thing of, the 1800s Melbourne Cups. It's just whoever was around. And then they started realising that they just put the 12-year-old stable boys on there because they were light. And then after that's sort of when jockeys start getting bred, as it were, to be the little fellas that they end up being today.
Didn't know that. I guess that makes sense. It's like an evolutionary cycle there to, you go from big lad on the horse to Damien Oliver. I just won the Melbourne Cup. Yeah. All those years ago.
Well, you used to just ride your own horse sometimes. If you entered your horse, you just ride it.
Oh, right.
So, it's like breeding. It's like a dachshund or something, like a sausage dog. They breed them to go down burrows to fight badgers underground. So they had to make them long and sort of skinny, but also strong. So basically that's how we ended up with jockeys. If you want the ultimate example, Simone Biles, she's 4'11".
Ah, yeah.
And she's good. I think probably the greatest athlete I've ever seen in anything.
Good shout.
She is. I genuinely think I could say that, at least in my lifetime, at least who I've seen, the most extraordinary performer in terms of being that far above and beyond everybody else at the absolute elite level. That kind of Bradman distance from the pack sort of thing. So Simone Biles, great example there. So Betty, she's 5 foot tall, probably for this reason that she becomes a wicket keeper, because why not? You tend to have small keepers. Fast hands, very neat. She's compared favourably with the top level male wicket keepers of the time. 1926, she's around the age of leaving school when, in a small town in Colwall, a meeting is held. That's in Herefordshire, which is not far south of Worcester, which is where so much women's cricket has been played in the modern era, at that ground in Worcester. And that's where the Women's Cricket Association is formed in 1926, which helpfully is detailed in the book by Netta Reinberg that was given to us by our listener Caroline at the Final Word game. So all of this comes together.
Couldn't have worked any better when we realised that this was all going to be in the book that I've got sat next to my bed right now, ready to read once I, basically I'm like, I am not reading any further books until the such time that our book is off to print, and that happened yesterday. So I can now start reading recreationally again rather than proofreading our own work over and over again. Yeah. But yeah, that was when you texted me this morning saying, you got that book? Yeah, I do. It's just up in my room. So I was able to send you the pages you needed for it.
So obviously Betty's too young to be involved with this meeting, which is happening at the time, but there are a bunch of ladies there who have a cricket holiday, and then they decide to start an association, including Mrs. Jonathan Scott Bowden, who doesn't get her own name, Biddy Abbott, Edith Clark, Kathleen Doman, Marjorie Pollard, Vera Cox. There are some great English names here. Mrs. P. Heron Maxwell, that's probably my favourite name. And a Mrs. Greenstock is there, Adam. And Mrs. Greenstock, her maiden name is Foster, and she is the sister of the famous cricketing Foster's family, which, R.E. Tip Foster, who you mentioned earlier. So by 1934, they arranged the first test tour. Betty Snowball's first listed miscellaneous game that I can find is from 1930, when she would have been 23 or so, at a cricket carnival match. Her first-class matches are on the 34 tour. They play WA, Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland. Peggy Antonio takes a bag for Victoria, of course, 5 for 24. And Betty Snowball's not doing anything particularly outrageous with the bat at this point. She makes 4, 2, 20, 14. Then she makes a 40 against Queensland that maybe gets her going. That's a 2-day game just before Christmas, December 22 and 23. And then to reduced travel, they stay in Brisbane for the first test on the 28th of December. And they rattle through Australia. First time around, we've talked about this test a bunch of times, but Myrtle McLagan with the ball, Australia all out 47, and then Betty Snowball helps add 48 for the first wicket. So basically, even though she's only made 15, she's still contributed to England being in an unassailable position. They triple Australia's score. Australia do better in the third innings, leaving them a modest chase, and Betty makes 18 not out. So a reasonable first outing. Even better opening stand in Sydney in the second test, puts on 145, makes 71 herself, again gets them a good lead into the third innings. And in that third innings, she stumps Ruby Monaghan, Phyllis Brewer, Nell McClarty, and Anne Palmer. 4 stumpings in an innings, still the record in women's test cricket to this day from the second test. So that's almost sort of Bannerman areas of having a record from such an early match. The bowlers are Joyce Partridge and Mary Spear. I think Joyce Partridge was involved in the Cricket Association formation as well. More great English names. England win that test as well. And then in the third test in Melbourne, Peggy Antonio does the job again, takes 6 for England don't get away. They're about parity after the second innings. And then Betty Snowball makes 83 not out to set them up a big lead. Well, a big enough lead of about 160. And they nearly bowl Australia out, but Australia bat out the draw at 8 wickets down and survive. The Pedden sisters, Margaret Pedden at one end, Barbara Pedden, who does most of the work with the bat, at the other end. And then off England go to New Zealand on this same tour, and it's in Christchurch that Betty Snowball makes the 189. It's a massive partnership with Molly Hyde, 200-plus partnership. They win by an innings and 337 runs. The New Zealand team is not the strongest team in the world. Well, there are only 3 teams in the world at this point internationally, but they're a relatively weak bowling side, but you still got to get them. So an innings and 337, even though New Zealand bat pretty well second time around after getting rolled cheaply in their first innings. Betty Snowball takes catches, affects stumpings, the works, has a hell of a test match. And then that's it for 3 years until Australia visit in 1937. She makes 72 in the first of those tests in the fourth innings run chase when they nearly win. England nearly chase it down, but Australia win narrowly. Peggy Antonio prominent again. Doesn't make any runs in the second test when England win, and then she makes that 99 in the third test to set up a big lead. And again, the Australians are able to bat out a draw. So then that's it. 7 tests, that's it for nearly 12 years. World War II in the way, all the rest of it. Had she retired at that point, she would have had a batting average of 62, as well as 20 dismissals in 7 tests. But she does what some players do, like what George Headley did.
I was going to say, this is the classic George Headley story we're rolling into here, isn't it? Where his batting average would have been 70 odd. I think it was 71 before World War II broke out. And I mean, it's still a terrific overall body of work. But anyway, please continue. But it has got echoes of that.
Very much that's what I was thinking, reading through it. So she's past 40 when she comes back, doesn't get the same results, doesn't make many runs. I think only adds 1 dismissal in those last 3 test matches, even though she's still keeping. Australia win the first, they draw the next 2, and it's probably not really thought of as a series in that sort of way, but they've won the series by our reckoning. Betty Snowball carries on with her life as a teacher. She never marries, and she goes to live in Colwall, the place where they formed the Women's Cricket Association all those years before. That's where she ends up teaching at a school there and then retiring there, living out her life there. And in 1986, when the Indian batter Sandhya Agarwal makes a score of 190 in a test match, it's the first time that anyone has threatened Betty's 189, and she goes past it. 52 years later, the record has stood for 52 years by the time that it's beaten for the first time. And where should that match take place but Worcester? And who should be in the crowd watching but Betty Snowball, 52 years on, who saw the record broken 2 years before she passed away in 1988 at 80 years old. One of the greats, one of the pioneers, and a fine figure behind the stumps, quick gloves, and held that record for so long, and held the England record until that test match a year and a bit ago when Tammy Beaumont finally made a better score for an England women's player. So there you are, Graeme. A little bit more on Betty Snowball.
What a beaut. Thank you, Graeme, who's been a terrific supporter of The Final Word for years, and I look forward to hopefully seeing him again at our live show in Melbourne. We've met in the past at those. So thank you, Graeme. The last number on today's show is with me. Now, this is one that's been on our to-do list for a pretty long time, Geoff. Joel Emonson, 960. Well, you can read the clue and then we can go through our workings.
Okay, there were quite a few clues. So
just read. Give me the first one, then I'll go from there after that.
My new nerd pledge is 96. My clue is, despite being a regular for a while, this player only got to play 1 match at a World Cup level, and it wasn't even called a World Cup, nor was it their preferred format. Still, this player is in an exclusive club of 66 Australians.
Now, this was. Yes, there was some definitional things around this clue that sent us down a number of different rabbit warrens that didn't prove to be productive. Joel in the past has sent through a number of quite extensive cryptic style clues, and we've been able to kind of unpick them over time, and almost all of them have related to women's cricket. I think all of them have been about the Australian women's team. So
there's been one or two that were Queensland men's related.
Okay, right. Nevertheless, that's where when I was handballed this number, I thought, well, it's most likely to be that. So I thought, let's go on the journey here. The 66, it was explained to me that had people including Bannerman, Laurie, Treadray, Ponting, Rolton. I'm like, shit, what's the club? The club is not an easy one to work out. So initially we thought Hall of Fame, because all of those aforementioned are in the Hall of Fame. But there are 63 members of the Hall of Fame. And indeed, one of the names cited here isn't in the Hall of Fame. So we had to belatedly knock off that idea. Then we were like, well, is this to do with like the combination of games played at World Cups? Because you see the World Cup reference there, right? So who played 1 game at a World Cup? So we were going through all of the different players who'd turned out for Australia, especially on the women's side of things, where there were a whole series of tournaments in the early days of that tournament back in the World T20 era before it got changed in 2018 was the last World T20, wasn't it? Then we went into the T20 World Cup time, which I didn't like, by the way, when they did that. My impression was that they were changing it to the T20 World Cup to stop people like you and me complaining about the 50 over World Cup having a reduction in teams. Anyway, That's years ago now. So we had the 2009, 2010, 2012, 2014, 2016, 2018 to pick from. The Australian women didn't win it in 2009 or 2016. So Australian players with one World T20 or T20 World Cup match included Nathan Horrocks, Ryan Harris, John Hastings, James Hopes, Kane Richardson, Cameron Green, and Taylor Valamick. And it just didn't nothing works. Once you got that far, you got a group of players. And so Ryan Harris conceded 95 T20 international runs. Our number was 96. We're at that level of rats and mice, right? We were nowhere near this. Nathan Horrocks took 196 list A wickets, the number being 96.
I liked the idea of James Hopes because I thought relatively niche, very Queensland, something like that.
Well, we're going to get there. So 66 Australians, right? This is... I'll just keep going through our workings and we'll get back to James Hopes.
I haven't looked at this in weeks, but this is we were doing some of this back and forth together, I don't know, months ago, really.
Yeah, well, it is months ago, and our Nerd Pledge team basically gave up, right? And I don't think they've ever got to a point in the past where they've given up. And on this one, they're like, we've done everything we can and we can't work it out. So this shows what a cold case it had become for us. Mm-hmm. So 66 spots in women's World Cup winning teams. Oh, that's not a bad shout. 6 11s have won World Cup. So let's try and pair that out. But there were too many repeat players, so it's not a club of 66, if that makes sense. Like there are 66 of them, but there are duplicates. So that doesn't happen either. So we ruled all this out. What about World Cup winners across the formats? 184 women have played in test matches for Australia. We looked at Cap 96 in one-dayers, who was Chris Britt, but that was before the World T20 era. So there were. I won't go through every single line of our research here, but just bear with me when I say that we looked at everything. Then we got to James Hopes and came full circle, because the bit with him that worked well was that he played 96 times for Australia, right? 960, 96. Okay, maybe this will tally. 84 one-day internationals and 12 T20s, but no idea on what's he of 66. Like what we talked about bowling in a winning tournament final, because Hopes played in the Champions Trophy final of 2009, and this I think was the red herring for a time. Maybe the Champions Trophy is being, because in the clue he refers to use his wording again. It wasn't even called a World Cup, so we're like, okay, James Hopes played in the Champions Trophy final of 2009.
Yeah, so
maybe this is what we're missing here. 67 Australians have bowled in a winning tournament final. 34 men in World Cups, in 50 over World Cups. 28 women, and a further 5 women in T20 World Cups for Australia. Nick Carey, Delissa Kimmins, Renee Farrell, Sophie Molyneux, and Georgia Wareham, who aren't on the one-day list. Now. Sorry, keep going here. The Champions Trophy final of 2009, were we going to count that as a World Cup? Yeah, but it didn't tally because of the numbers. There's no 66 here, right? But then, with the help of Joel, when this was cold and this was going nowhere, and we're like, we're fucked here, we can't do this, Joel helped me get to where we needed to be. What does the 66 represent? There's only 66 players who've gotten a first cap for Australia. 2 Test 11s, 2 one-day 11s, and 2 T20 11s, right? So there is 66 players. So thus Bannerman...
Who've been in the inaugural team.
Right. So thus Bannerman referenced there for Test cricket. Yeah. Bill Laurie referenced there for one-day cricket, and so on it went. And Treadray, women's first one-dayer. You know where I'm going here.
And so James Hopes plays in the first T20.
Bang. James Hopes plays in the first T20 that Australia played.
With Shane Harwood and whatnot.
I don't know if Harwood was in the first one. He was certainly in one of the early ones. The first T20 was the one where...
He was in one of the ones with nicknames, because he had stickers on the back of his shirt. Yeah, that's the only reason I remember. Yeah,
he came up recently. I was playing a game for MCC, and they were telling me about how he'd pro'd up there, and it was just like, the story of him rocking up and just destroying and terrorising a bunch of poor Englishmen that didn't know what the fuck was going on with this mad Victorian. Hopes played in the first T20I. He was cap number 3, as it turns out. I guess that was done on alphabetical listings.
Yes.
And he played 12 in that format, the aforementioned 84 one-day internationals. And just on James Hopes, he was a gun. I think somehow he's underrated. I reckon there's a thing with all-rounders, Geoff, where if you've got you almost have your better discipline discounted if your second discipline isn't as good, if that makes sense. So he was a very competent batter, more than a competent batter. His numbers bear this out. But he was an exceptional bowler, but doesn't get the credit for his bowling because he wasn't an exceptional batter. He was a very good batter, an exceptional bowler, but I think the batting affects the way the bowling's interpreted, if that makes sense.
Also, he was a bit chunky and he bowled mediums. And basically, in Australia, that is a recipe to be disregarded. They're like, well, you're shit because you didn't bowl 145, you bowled 130
and a bit. Yeah, I reckon he was your 130 to 135 bracket. I mean, he bowled as quickly as Glenn McGrath did, if you want to use that metric, but still.
But he didn't look as good because he was short and he was a little bit blockier. So they were like, well, he's a bit fat and he's a bit slow. I'm not saying it's fair or reasonable, but I'm saying that's how cricketers get interpreted in Australia in that sense. And you can get away with it if you're batting, maybe if you're the David Boone sort of situation. But yeah, if you're not tall, and you don't sort of have that physical specimen sort of tag attached to you, then people underrate you. He's the leading wicket taker in 50 over domestic cricket in Australia. Clearly he could play.
Absolutely, and there's more of his bowling about to come. It's funny. I never thought of him as a chunky guy. That's one of the first things you've identified with James Hope. So I didn't feel
just a little bit.
I didn't feel him being that way.
Just because he wasn't that tall, he came across that way.
Yeah. So just to go through a few, he took 301 Shield wickets or 301 first class wickets. My apologies, at Queensland and for Australia, right, at 26, which. He was Shield Player of the Year at the peak of his powers in 2010, 2011. That's when he became captain of Queensland. They won the Shield under him back-to-back in 2011-12 and 2012-13. So, he was an exceptional domestic cricketer. Got a few years in those early days of the IPL. So he was highly thought of, and sought after around the world, which make the other part that Joel referred to me today all the more odd. It was his World Cup omissions that pissed off Joel and now annoys me in retrospect. It doesn't, he'd been in the Aussie team since 2004. Bloody difficult team to break into. A kind of a classic wicket a match kind of guy who could bat 7 and help balance the team. So he averaged 25 in his one-day internationals, which gives a feeling for that. But in 2000,
they had so many of those because they had the Andrew Simons, Shane Lee, Shane Watson
not
kind of era where
it's more Watto. It's less a problem with it's more the later bit. So 2007, Simons obviously is still there, but it's Watson comes back from injury. I'm not saying Watto didn't deserve his spot, but it feels like Hopes he's unlucky to be squeezed out of that one. But then 2011, worse again. So in 2009, I mentioned the Champions Trophy. He was part of the side that won that. In 2010, he's never better. I mentioned he's the Shield Player of the Year. Dominates domestic cricket, making match-winning performances with bat and ball in that year, 2010. He makes a 56 from 26 against the Windies at the G, takes 5 for 14 against Ireland in a match that Australia were actually at some risk of losing that one-day international there. But despite being ranked in the top 10 bowlers in the world, and I think he was ranked like the number 3 all-rounder in the world or something like that, he lost his spot for the 2011 World Cup squad because, again, Shane Watson was fit. It's a really interesting squad that you look through. Actually, it wasn't even Watto who was fit. They went another way. But you look at the squad from 2011, it's when the Australian cricketing crisis tag was being bandied about because they lost the Ashes. The idea that if Australia lose to England in Australia, it is by definition a crisis. And it was the root and branch review from Don Argus and it was a difficult time for Australia on the field. But I think in hindsight, a lot of this was kind of overblown. It's a little bit like when they were rolled for 85 in Hobart, Geoff, which we were there for. That got turned into the most significant crisis in Australian cricket. Well, they played poorly for a time and lost games of cricket at home. That will happen from time to time. Anyway, so that's the context of the 11 World Cup. Ponting's last rodeo as captain. And the all-rounders, Cam White, Watto, David Hussey, and John Hastings. So it's really John Hastings that keeps James Hopes out of the side when you consider the role that Hopes was playing with the ball at the time. Jason Crazier's also in that squad as the spinner. Cal Ferguson's there as one of the batters. Steve Smith's there as a kid. He didn't get to play in a World Cup in either 2007 or 2011. His career ended with 67 wickets for Australia in the one-day format of the game, 600 or so wickets in professional cricket, including 155, as you mentioned, noted before, Geoff, in the Mercantile Mutual, which is noteworthy, right? The most wickets ever in that tournament, which has been going for over 40 years. That's a significant record to hold. Made 7 tons for Queensland, showing that wider worth, a first-class batting average of 31. Fine captain, successful captain. Did a lot of coaching as well, skills coaching in the IPL and other domestic leagues around the world. T20 cap, number 3, cold case solved. He was one of the 66, and he played 96 internationals, 960. Joel Emonson, we got you.
We got you eventually. Yeah, I feel like we should have twigged on that earlier. 66 being 6 times 11, like it had to be different 11s. Anyway, I'm glad we've got there in the end. If you want to be like Joel and be a repeat pledger on the show and keep being part of the fabric of Storytime, you can do it. Patreon.com/thefinalword. You can also get the ad-free feed. You can get discount tickets to the live shows. You can be part of the online community, all the rest of those things. Thanks to Westfield London, Westfield Stratford City. Thanks to all the patrons for supporting the show. I need to go to Lord's. Adam, I will see you later.
You will indeed. Have nice weekends, everybody.
Bye.